First off, again, just want to thank Marcela for joining today's webinar and sitting down and talking to me. I think we're going to have a fantastic session. Expect this to be 45, 50 minutes. We are also going to have a Q&A section, so please start typing your questions into the chat. We're going to save all of those and make sure that we get to them at the end. And also just want to thank my colleagues, Poppy, Nikita, the whole tech team for actually giving us the opportunity to do this webinar on Unibudy's virtual events platform. So what we're showing you is what we expect prospects to be seeing if you are a university partner using Unibuddy for your virtual events as well. So on that note, just wanted to click over to the next slide. So I'm just going to do some brief introductions. Marcela Mejia-Martinez, the Assistant Vice President of Admissions at Chapman University. From my own research, I know that you are a member of OACAC, the Council of International Schools Latin America Committee, and then once upon a time you were also the admissions professional at your alma mater, Loyola Marymount University. Marcela, I feel like that's a lot of information, but I'd love to hear just a little bit more about your background as well for everyone's benefit.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. This is so exciting to be here. Hi, Lou. I see you too. I am a first-generation college student. My parents immigrated from Colombia, South America, to the United States, and kind of with a dream that their kids were going to be able to live the American dream, and really instill the idea of education without really being able to help us through the process. They didn't know the language that well. They didn't understand the educational system. They themselves did not go to college. And so my college search experience was very much one of my own. I was very much the individual looking at where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, and being the first female, convincing my parents that it was okay for me to actually go to college and live at college and do the things that I want to do, things like study abroad and things that were important to me. And I loved my college experience. It was so wonderful. But when I was there, I was actually prepared and thinking I was going to become an MFT, and worked in the field of drug and alcohol rehab with adolescents. And working in the hospital setting, after graduation, I was also working in schools in the Long Beach area, and really tried to work more on prevention programs as opposed to working with the kids in the hospital. And I really realized I wanted to be more in that education or a positive space. So I went back to my alma mater and applied for a position in the Office of Admission. I'd never worked in admissions ever as an undergrad. I was involved in many other things, but they offered me an opportunity. And the reason why I went back is so many of us do. If you go back to your higher ed or work in higher ed, you get tuition remission. So I was thinking, oh, I can do my master's for free. So that's how I landed accidentally in admission. And as we were talking about, Jonathan, before, it's either 3 years or 30. I'm now going on year 22, I believe, or maybe 24. So what was an accidental fall into admission turned into these areas of curiosity. I've been an event planner. I've worked with transfer students. I've worked in financial aid. I've dedicated a lot of my time to the world of international admission, and always with the idea of really pushing for first generation students and students that are not the likely students to join a university campus. I've been a huge champion of the liberal arts as well. And so those are things that are just really dear and true to me. I'm also, while I was in college, met my husband, who was an international student, also from Colombia. And we've been together ever since for almost 30 years. And so the idea of international education has always been very true and dear to my heart as well. So these are all very unique populations, but super important to me. And the places that I've worked, I have always been working to improve in supporting, whether it's international students, first-gen students, non-traditional students, students that come from underserved communities, and that's something that's super important to me.
Thanks, Marcela, for sharing your story. I'm really excited to kind of talk about what we're doing through Unibuddy, as well as what you're doing at Chapman University to help FGLI students, help international communities. Just before getting into it, also want to share a little bit about my background. So I was an international student who came over to the United States about 12 years ago. My parents were first generation, so while they had some advice about how to apply to college, they didn't necessarily have advice about applying to the United States specifically. And so I did a lot of what students do. I scrolled through universities' websites trying to get information, ran into a lot of brick walls. And when I did, I had one saving grace, which was my older brother, who went through the whole process a year ahead of me and ended up doing really well. He landed on his feet at Yale University. And thanks to his help, I also ended up following him to Yale as well. And had 4 fantastic years. I think perhaps unsurprisingly, just because I saw how much education transformed my parents' lives and helped them and helped ultimately me and my brother to end up at a place like Yale, decided to get into admissions as well. And unlike Marcela, I was one of those admissions officers who after 3 years, despite loving the job, loving the work, loving the team, I decided that I wanted to get back to graduate school, ultimately switch to kind of a role in higher ed tech to help those hundreds of thousands of students as opposed to the 2,000 we're admitting every year. And I thought higher ed tech companies are the best way to do that. Helping those students who are first generation like my parents, or just don't have an older brother to kind of walk them through the entire admissions process. So with introductions out of the way, I just wanted to, Again, just reiterate, we got 45 minutes, and just want to share a little bit of research and some information about Unibuddy before then getting to kind of the main part of the webinar. So with that said, I think there were 3 really important and necessary steps to personalizing the digital student experience. From our research, what we found is that the first most important step, real experiences matter. I think prospective students, they are really leaning to social media right now because they're looking for authenticity. And then once they've kind of found that authenticity, it's about building up their confidence by using personalized communications so they know this story that is true for someone else, it can also be true for them. And then the third and final step is that students, they want to have a community and they want to know their community before they even step onto campus. So they're really looking to engage with current students and figure that out before they then take that leap and put down a deposit and enroll. And while there are a bunch of pieces of technology out there, solutions that do 1 or 2 of these steps really well, there's only one that really does all 3 extremely well, and that's Unibuddy. Our mission is to help students make better decisions through shared human experience, and we do that in 2 main ways. The first is through our Unibuddy chat platform. We're just taking a single line of code, iframe, we're embedding it on the back end of universities' websites, hitting publish, and then you can see, just like you've got up here, a profile for every single student ambassador, filters that they can use to kind of customize the list and find that ambassador who is like them a year, 2 years ahead in the process. And then we've integrated with Generation Z messaging apps. So that way, when they have 5 minutes to spare in between classes, between extracurriculars, they can ask their questions and have those ambassadors respond kind of when it's convenient for everyone. And so what we're seeing because of that, conversations are lasting 16 to 46% longer. And the outcomes are just so much better because they're finding a student who's like them and can actually really speak to their experiences. And then, like I mentioned before, we're already on the Unibody Live platform. we built out a virtual events platform that was specific to admissions work, was built specifically with students in mind. I think we're all experiencing a little bit of Zoom fatigue now that we're hitting the 1-year anniversary of, I guess, when the pandemic really kick-started. And, we have heard time and time again that students, they have social anxiety, especially if they're first generation low income. They feel self-conscious about being on camera or awkwardly switching off the camera. And so we built up a panel-centric, speaker-centric platform where students can have conversations, type in their questions, but then not necessarily on camera. It's Marcela, it's me, it's whoever your admission staff will be or your panelists will be who are kind of running the show, so to speak. So that's everything in terms of what Unibuddy does right now. But we're growing rapidly. There's more to come. And we've been really excited to see in the last few years that we've just grown so quickly that we're now operating in nearly 30 countries, working with over 450 institutions. And these are just some of the universities that we are working with right now. So with that out of the way, really want to get back to kind of the topic at hand, the value of community, personalizing the digital student experience. So I'm just going to stop sharing. And I'm going to start asking some questions. So Marcela, just to start off with, could you talk to us about why you first chose Unibuddy at Chapman?
Well, so much of it is timing. I think that I began the conversation about what is Unibuddy and the opportunities to have Chapman explore Unibuddy at a NACAC prior to all this upside down world. And we began conversations even before we knew that we'd be shutting things down, primarily first to think about our international population and connecting specifically our brand new College of Engineering. So the original scope was much smaller, and we were thinking that it would just be for these two populations. Give it a try. Let's see how it goes. Finding the students that were going to be Chapman representatives that would be on the other side of the Unibuddy link. But when the pandemic hit in early March and we were seeing that we were going to be leaving, we really decided to expand this and find ways to truly connect both our domestic students as well as our international students, so a global reach, to try to figure out how to make sure that we could still have what I consider to be that peer assurance. I think that peer assurance is something that's so important for kids to not just meet each other, like the Chapman students, but others, but for students from the UK, for instance, to see that there are other students from the UK that are also looking at Chapman. That peer assurance, you get that when you're on a tour, right? You come, the tour has 20, 25 people, you say where everyone's from, you have this idea that, oh, wow, there's all these people looking at Chapman as well. In this space, we were able to do something really similar, and that's something that was definitely key.
And I guess, what recruitment goals does it specifically help you meet?
For us, it really is that idea of relationship building and connection. I think that that's something that's so important in the work that we do in admission. It's all about relationship building. And so although we were able to, back in the spring of 2020, really focus a lot of the work that we were doing on yield and connection and melt, making sure that we can continue to connect people. We kind of continued on and even looked at it for an opportunity for lead generation. And so we're excited to head into it now a whole year later and really capitalizing on even more admitted student opportunities this time around too.
Yeah.
So really all parts of the funnel.
Yeah, definitely. So just a follow-up question on that. I think sometimes in admissions, there seems to be this trade-off between, building stronger relationships, more personalized communications, and scale, whether you can do that for everyone. How have you found, the switch to, during the pandemic to kind of more digital recruitment. Have you been able to strike that balance?
I feel like we have. I mean, one of the things that we do quite a bit beyond Unibuddy is the idea of really leveraging our CRM. We are a Slate school. And so the idea that we go back to trying to put ourselves in the headspace of a young person and thinking that they don't want just a generalized newsletter. They want something that's really specific to what they want and what they're interested in. And so using snippets in a lot of what we do, whether that's in a digital format or even using, I don't know how to pronounce commercial for Slate, but Slate print, sending out postcards with the student's name on it and only sending information that's really specific to them. I think that's something that's really important because we know that what we used to do is we'd do like a monthly newsletter with just all the information for all the different audiences, and students would be very confused. Like, I'm already admitted. Like, why am I getting this information about when decision releases if they were an early applicant and now we're in the regular season? So to be able to really personalize that way in terms of populations, but the same thing with the events that we do is if we offer a lot of different opportunities now in a application status portal, we can either show you everything if you want to see everything, but the thing that you mainly see is the details about the majors that you applied to or the clubs and organizations that you've said that you've been interested in pursuing, or we know that your first gen information about first gen programming that's coming up, and then connecting students also through the Unibuddy app based on majors or countries, and different details that we have about students, and having our students share also what are the clubs and organizations that are involved in. So when kids are scrolling through, they could be like, ooh, I'm interested in that. Let me connect with that student. I think that that's something that's really powerful that, we didn't always do in person either, because, you showed up for your tour guide might be a film production major and you're interested in electrical engineering. So although the experience of being a student at Chapman was definitely captured, you weren't really talking with a student that was specifically in your major or in your field. So yeah, it's definitely been a big plus.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big differences I've seen in the last 5 years since I left admissions. It was almost like a trade-off. You couldn't do both. And now there's just, with Unibuddy and with just kind of the way that higher education tech has changed the landscape, you don't necessarily have to kind of sacrifice one for the other. You can be personalized and do it at scale. So also just wanted to ask you a little bit about your ambassador program. How did you get started with the Unibody platform? And, tell us a little bit about the ambassador program and how that fit in.
Sure. So we've always had, obviously, the students that we hire to work in our office. So the interns, the tour guides. We also have a volunteer team. So we have a group usually between 30 and 60 students every semester that volunteer for the admissions office. They help out with phone calling campaigns and different things of that nature. When we were putting together the Unibuddy, obviously we reached out platform. We reached out to the volunteers. We scheduled our current students to be a part of a lot of the live events and the chat overall. But then we also reached out to departments in other areas. So like I mentioned earlier, engineering was one of those areas that we really wanted to make sure had a good presence. And so we asked the faculty and the deans to recommend students to us. And we did that kind of across a variety of different colleges. And in our international student ambassador program, they already had an ambassador program. So we just asked students who else wanted to be involved. The cool thing about all of this is when graduate admissions started seeing what we were doing at the undergraduate level, many of the faculty in grad raised their hand. Our food science and nutrition program was like, I have a couple students that I want to make sure are highlighted on the Unibuddy account so that we can make sure that they have connections with our current students. And a couple others have done the same. And so it's kind of organically expanded. And obviously you've got two staff members that manage the students and the ambassadors and train them up, and also monitor and make sure that students are responding in a timely fashion, and that the responses are accurate responses as well, because that's definitely important. So that's definitely something that's been manageable. Our assistant that worked in our visitor center, so in person with students that came to visit campus and tour and things of that nature, we had to reinvent her job because obviously the visitor center is no longer open. And so it was a very natural, she was already in charge of working with the tour guides, for her to take over and really foster this group as well, which has been really great. And now we've got to rethink, when we do go back in person, what is our job going to look like? Because this is such an important part of the success of things that we're doing. We can't let this slide. We've got to make sure that we give it as much attention as we're giving to it now that we're in a remote world.
Yeah. I imagine that the pandemic has changed more than 50% of all job descriptions in the world of higher education admissions.
Definitely, in many areas, yes. And even our student staff, right? Having to reimagine, how do we incorporate the student staff, and making sure that they're a part of teams, and that they're a part of the live chats and the different platforms that we're using to connect with students and with each other.
Yeah. So, excuse me. So I just want to shift the focus to educational equity. So, when we think about educational equity, the student voice becomes increasingly important. So why is the current student voice important as a part of your work?
I think you said it earlier, the idea of just giving that authentic, relatable, relational connection. I think those things are all important. And I go back to what I said, a lot of times people will look at an admissions counselor and say, oh, well, they're the marketing arm of the school. Of course, they're going to say everything's perfect and great. And that's not true. I mean, we tell the truth in terms of where we need to improve and what's good and what's not. But they believe our students so much more, and especially Gen Z. I mean, they're all about not believing the brand or the branding people. And they're looking on YouTube, and they're going out on social media. And although they follow us, they also follow the clubs and the orgs and the people and the different groups on campus to try to get that more authentic voice. And so that's something that's really critical in so much of this, is that we need to make sure that it doesn't all look picture perfect, and you can really get the true experience, and I think that's really critical.
Yeah, I think just kind of before I ask my next question, I realized that there are some students who don't kind of fit into the traditional definition of what a student who goes to a college or university is. And sometimes it's harder for them to hear voices that are similar to them, that speak to their experience. So I guess with that in mind, how would you define a non-traditional student? Because I know that's obviously a very broad term.
Right. And it's funny because I think because of the fact that I worked with transfers for a long time, I always considered non-traditional students that were of a different age, that weren't your typical 18 to 21. But I've recognized that non-traditional tag can also really reach students that are underrepresented on our campuses, that are students that, like myself, when I went to college, the first-gen student, or the student that's low socioeconomic, or the student that is a student of color, that we may not have the mass, or from certain parts of the world as well. And so really trying to make sure that we also have representation from all different life experiences for that connection to happen, so that students can understand what's it like to be a student there if there aren't many of us, or if it's a group that is just now beginning to flourish and grow. And so, yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it, is the idea that it's whoever's not the majority on your campus.
Yeah. I remember when I worked in admissions, one of our favorite programs was this kind of non-traditional student program where we would admit students who were mid-career, people who'd kind of gone and had a life and life experiences before then deciding that they wanted a college experience. And they were some of the best students that we ever
Amazing.
admitted. People who were firefighters for 20 years and then decided they were ready for a college experience, professional ballet dancers who realized that they now had a desire to read English literature or spend time in a lab. And yeah, I think if you were an undergraduate, an 18 or 19-year-old, and you're sitting in a seminar with one of those students, it really just opens up possibilities and makes you kind of re-examine your own priorities. So I guess with that in mind, how do you use the Unibuddy platform in particular to reach students who are from these non-traditional backgrounds?
Well, I think one of the important things is to making sure that our ambassador base is kind of have a breadth of voice, that they don't all look the same, or they don't all come from the same area background. So not only the diversity of majors that are offered, but those different types of experiences as well, making sure that our veterans are represented, making sure that we have transfers in the group. And so that's something that's very intentional on our behalf. And that's true when we're hiring students to work in our office. No matter what, we want to make sure that we have that great, and that's true for me too. I mean, when I'm hiring admission counselors, one of the first things, if I have a position open on my team, one of the first questions I always ask is, what voice is missing from the table? I want to make sure that there's plenty of voices around the table for when we are out recruiting or making decisions on students. And then also the idea that the cross-training that we do, or the training that we do, or that connection that they have with one another is also critical, so that they can understand each other's life stories and say, you're asking me things that I can't really answer, but I've got a friend over here who could definitely help you out with that. And so I think that that's something that's really important. We did very intentional programming for first-gen students. We have a pretty amazing, it's a program called Promising Futures for our first-gen students that are coming into the university. It includes a summer bridge prior to orientation. It includes all types of social as well as learning type programming, a lot of support for students to learn about study abroad or research or presenting at conferences, and really helping students kind of expand out. And so we did a lot of very intentional programming for first-gen students last spring, and we've continued it throughout. And that's something that Unibuddy's been great. And our folks from the Promising Futures program have provided their own ambassadors that are a part of our platform to making sure that we've got their voice there too. And that's something that's great.
Yeah, I love that idea.
That's just one example.
Yeah, I think sometimes people come into it using Unibuddy thinking this is a recruitment tool, this is a yield tool, but we're also finding that universities are using us on the student success side, on the retention side, making sure, I think, kind of like I said earlier, that people are able to find their community before they step onto campus, and just like easily engage with that community moving forward. And I love those programs that you've mentioned at Chapman. I know when I worked in admissions, we actually created like a similar summer bridge type program for our admitted students who were coming from schools, from communities where they didn't necessarily have the same educational resources. And, you know, they would come to Yale and spend 5 weeks before campus, you know, the semester started, and they would take English 114 because our research showed that if they took that class, then over the next 2 years, they were going to very quickly narrow the gap between those students who went to private school, who went to these public schools that are almost exactly like private schools. So it's great to hear just some of the work that you're doing to make sure that these non-traditional students don't just come to Chapman, but are also succeeding, you know, during their 4 years in college, or you know, 5 or 6. That's great. So I guess just wanted to shift again to think about the future, and you know, obviously 2021 hopefully is not as chaotic and kind of crazy as 2020. But as you look forward, how do you plan on using Unibudy's platform in your planning for 2021?
Well, we're going to continue with a lot of the live chat features. What we're finding is that it's definitely a great way, and I go back to that idea of that peer assurance. When you put together these live chats of students that are all interested in similar things, so whether that's learning about study abroad or Greek life or STEM at Chapman, you start to find your community, right? You start to find students that have a very similar interest in what they see their next 4 years look like. And so they're exploring and asking questions, and they can hear each other's questions here this way, but see each other's questions. And I think that's really important. So we really want to continue to foster that. And then from here, obviously, really leaning into a lot of the other social media platforms as well. Although we create a Facebook group for students, and we all know that our students only join Facebook in order to be in these groups because they're really not in that space. We're trying to figure out what other ways and other places that they are, and measure whether it makes sense to, you know, be in that Reddit space or be in that Discord space, or do we create WhatsApp groups for students? And we really want it to be organic because we want them to know and meet each other, especially since they can't do it in person right now. And so back when we were in person, we would host overnight programs for first-gen students. And so all the students could come and meet one another that selected that particular date, but at least they had a group of friends that they'd met and spent the night on campus and did these different things. And so how do we recreate those spaces in a virtual way? So live chat's a great way to start it, and then we move into other social media platforms to make sure that they start their own groups. And a lot of times they do it themselves. I know the dance students, as early as last year, students that were accepted into our dance program, they started their own group. And then the parents started groups on Facebook, and they would support one another. And so the parents are starting their groups, and we can't forget the parents, of course, because they're so important in all of this. So how do we reach the parents as well, and working with our parent relations programs to making sure that we're building community. I mean, that's something that's so important about everything that we've got at Chapman. We talk about the Chapman community all the time. And so if we can create that earlier, our Black student faculty and staff forum the last couple of years have done some amazing, all throughout the summer, connecting everybody together. But then once we had orientation, making sure we had an event where it was a reception and they can all actually meet each other in person. And so although you may only be meeting each other in a virtual world to a certain point, we made sure at some point we could also connect in person because we know that that's something that's really important. And people are craving that. We want to, minimize the friction as best we can by creating these supportive spaces. And I think that's important.
I really love that. I guess what would you say to admissions professionals who maybe feel nervous about the idea of kind of handing over the reins to students, to parents, to kind of create these spaces where maybe there is an admissions professional who's able to kind of follow everything that's happening? Like, how did you get to that place of confidence?
It's so funny. We as admission professionals really want to control all those spaces because we want to make sure that no one missteps or says something incorrectly or over exaggerates something or over promises, because quite frankly we don't want that to happen either. And so in some cases we're more of a watchful eye to see what's happening or what's being said. I'll give one example. One of our colleges, the Dodge College of Film and Media Arts, have been doing their own takeovers. And so they had this great student on who is film production, our most competitive program to get into at Chapman, with about a 7% admit rate. And students asked him, so once I get to Chapman, can I just apply and be a student there? Can I just apply once I get there, come in through what we call the back door? And he's like, yeah, sure, you can apply. And I was like, that's the wrong information. And so we're watching it. And then there's an opportunity to come in later and correct if misinformation is being given. But I think we just sit back and we watch and let it happen. And it's okay. I want students to give their true experience. I know that with so much of the beyond the pandemic, our social pandemic, our social justice pandemic that we've been experiencing in the United States, a lot of our students have come up and said, hey, Chapman, do better. Here are areas where we need to improve. And they're really putting in front of us the things that aren't working for them. And that's important because it's about correcting. It's about improving. And I want families to see that too. It's okay for them to see the things that aren't working for our students. But then the more important part is, what is our response to that? So I think I've just learned to kind of let go a little bit. And then provide, if I can, some recommendations. So if Parent Relations is doing a program and they only have parents that are from Orange County and they all look the same, I might come in and say, hey, next time you do a program, can you get a student parent from New Jersey and maybe someone from abroad, and can we diversify the panel? And so they're open to the recommendations without us controlling it completely.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that insight. This is an idea that here at Unibuddy we're thinking a lot about right now. Nothing to officially share at the moment, but watch this space because I think we're very much we understand the power of virtual communities. Great. Well, I think that's kind of the official kind of end to the discussion, but we would really love to start answering questions from the audience. And I already see that there is one here from Victoria. And her question is, what's the most creative way you've seen a prospective student reach out to a current student outside of Unibuddy? For Marcela, as well as the rest of the audience.
I think that one thing that students are definitely using quite a bit, at least to learn more about our university, is through YouTube. And and that's, again, content that I can't control. Students put their information out there, and same with TikTok, right? So they're out there creating content about their lived experience. And that's something that we have to honor and hopefully embrace as well. And I know that students have connected with current students because of the content that they've seen. And so I think that's something that's really great. The other way is obviously, it's primarily in social media through Instagram and the different ways to connect that way. We always encourage students to go back to people that graduated from their high school that are now at our universities. And I've definitely done that after a school visit and I've had like an amazing interaction with a student or two. I'll go back to the students from that particular high school that graduated a year or two ago and say, hey, do you mind connecting with this student? So sometimes I create it, but I think that students are finding each other in these social media spaces without us even knowing.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say that. I think one of the articles that made the rounds on LinkedIn was about Gen Z and what professions they kind of were most interested in being. And I think it got so popular as an article because above astronaut, above being a doctor, that number one spot was influencer.
Influencer, yeah.
And I just think that there's, clearly, there's obviously like something, you see all these personalities who go viral on YouTube, on Instagram, and it's just interesting how the Gen Z just seems so much more comfortable with generating content, sharing their lived experiences in this kind of public virtual format. I know that Unibuddy, we have like a blog post feature, and it's just interesting.
You've been using that. Yeah, that's another area that we've definitely started tapping into.
Yeah, and I know sometimes administrators solicit content and ask people to write blogs, but we also hear a lot, our customer success managers, that people are just writing blog posts, and the administrators are then, seeing what's in the kind of in the funnel, and they can publish or, ask people to edit before then publishing. Marcela, we have another question from the audience. From Lou. So during your session at International ACAC or IACAC in Canada, you outlined a service learning piece that was offered as a replacement/option for interviews. Can you highlight that program and its impact on building community?
Yeah, absolutely. So service is something that's so important to us. It's even a part of our general education service learning component. And so we decided that in a lot of the areas in which we travel, that beyond going, and this is obviously when we traveled, that beyond going to high school visits and college fairs and the traditional things that we do or interviews, that we would put together a service project, and we invite prospective students to join us on that service project. And we do that both at the prospect stage, and then we do it again at the admit stage for admitted students. And it really is awesome because first off, you get to meet students where service is important to them too. And that's something that speaks volumes to us. But they're in a much more relaxed state. It's not like this contrived interview where they've practiced all the questions and they're not in their comfortable space. This is, we're shorts and t-shirts and we're planting trees in NorCal. And you get to know people in a much more relaxed setting. And so that's definitely been something we've been doing for years. I can't remember when we started doing this. It was probably 10 years ago or so. And it's a little more prominent in some areas than others. Sometimes we lean on the high schools to ask us, what's an important project that's in your own backyard. We've done that up in Washington State. And so it's just something we encourage our counselors to do wherever they're traveling. And it's really a great way to build community. Yeah. Kind of unique.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're all be able to do this again in person and be out on the road. I know that was one of the more fun aspects of being an admissions professional, actually going to the places that you read applications from and meeting and seeing the students. So we're at 12:45 p.m. on the East Coast. We can definitely take a couple of more questions if anyone in the audience has anything they'd like to ask. If not, I think, we're happy to kind of give everyone back 5 minutes of their time. Marcela, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk with me. The 45 minutes has just flown by. I really appreciate it. fascinated by what you're doing and what Chapman University is doing, especially when it comes to non-traditional students and how you're recruiting them, supporting them. Just very, very exciting. And we're happy to call you a partner. We're very proud to stand with you. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for including me again, and happy to answer any questions outside of this space if universities or individuals have questions about the work that we're doing.
Yeah, we will be making a recording of this, and we'll be sharing it with everyone who was able to register and attend today. And obviously, we'd love it if you could share it with your colleagues and anyone, and I guess help facilitate the ongoing conversation about how to personalize the digital student experience. Thanks everyone so much for your time. I hope that you all have a great rest of your Thursday, as well as a great weekend. So thanks so much, everyone.